The wind howled across the frozen wasteland of Kepler 442 like a wild beast searching for prey. Snow fell in thick sheets, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Jake Murphy pulled his heavy coat tighter around his shoulders as he worked inside his small repair shop. The heating unit hummed loudly, fighting against the cold that tried to creep through every crack in the metal walls. Jake had been alone on the surface for 3 weeks now. Most of the other colonists had gone underground to the heated tunnels beneath New Detroit Colony. The winter was lasting much longer than anyone expected. What should have been a normal 3-month cold season had stretched into 6 months of bitter frost and endless snow. The colony leaders kept saying it would end soon, but Jake wasn't so sure. He didn't mind being alone. Working on machines was something he understood better than talking to people. The mining equipment needed constant repair, and someone had to stay up here to keep it running. If the machines stopped working, the whole colony would be in trouble. They needed the rare metals from the deep mines to trade with other planets for food and supplies. Jake wiped grease from his hands with an old rag and looked at the plasma cutter he had been fixing. The tool was important for cutting through the thick metal plates that protected the mining robots from the harsh weather. He had almost finished repairing the damaged power cell when he heard something strange. Soft scratching sound came from outside his shop door. At first, he thought it was just ice scraping against the metal in the wind, but the sound came again, more steady this time. Someone or something was out there. Jake set down his tools and walked toward the door. The scratching continued, urgent and desperate. He grabbed his plasma rifle from the wall mount just in case. There were stories about dangerous creatures living in the frozen wilderness. Though no one had ever seen them up close, he pressed his ear against the cold metal door. The scratching stopped, but now he could hear something else. A low, soft sound like whimpering. It reminded him of the sound his old dog used to make when it was hurt or scared. Jake's hand moved to the door controls. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed the button. The heavy door slid open with a hiss, letting in a blast of freezing air and snow. What he saw made him drop his rifle. A massive creature stood in the doorway, covered in snow and ice. It looked like a Whelps, but it was huge, almost as tall as Jake's waist. Its fur was unlike anything he had ever seen. Instead of normal animal fur, this creature had what looked like crystalline strands that caught the light from his workshop and sparkled like tiny stars. The fur was mostly white and silver, but it had patches of pale blue that seemed to glow softly in the dim light. The creature's eyes were the most shocking thing about it. They were large and intelligent, a deep blue color that seemed almost human. As Jake stared, the creature looked right back at him. There was something in those eyes that made Jake's heart race. Not fear, but recognition. This was not just an animal. This was something that could think and feel. The creature held something in its mouth. 3 small shapes, motionless and covered in frost. Jake realized they were babies, pups of the same species as the mother. The little ones were not moving at all. Their tiny bodies hung limply from their mother's gentle grip. The mother Whelps carefully placed the 3 pups on the ground in front of Jake's door. She nudged them toward the warmth that was flowing out of his workshop. Then she looked up at Jake again, and he saw something that made his chest tighten with emotion. Her eyes were filled with desperate hope. She was asking for help. Jake had seen that look before, in the eyes of colonists who brought him their broken equipment. It was the look of someone who had tried everything they could think of and was now putting their faith in his hands, but this was different. This creature was not asking him to fix a machine. She was asking him to save her children. The pups were clearly dying. Their small bodies were rigid with cold, and their crystalline fur had lost its sparkle. Ice had formed around their tiny noses and mouths. Jake could see that they were not breathing. "Oh no," Jake whispered, his breath forming white clouds in the cold air. "How long have they been like this?" The mother Whelps seemed to understand that he was trying to help. She stepped back, giving him room to work, but her eyes never left her babies. She made a soft sound, almost like a whimper. but deeper and more musical than any sound Jake had heard from an animal. Jake made a quick decision. He bent down and carefully picked up the first pup. It was surprisingly light, and its body felt stiff and cold like a piece of frozen meat. But as he held it close to his chest, he thought he felt something. A tiny flutter like a heartbeat buried deep beneath the ice. "They're still alive," he said, more to himself than to the mother. "Just barely, but they're still alive." He carried the first pup into his workshop, feeling the warmth of his heater begin to thaw the ice on its fur. The mother wolf followed him inside, staying close but not interfering. Jake placed the pup on a pile of warm blankets near his plasma forge, where the heat was strongest. He went back for the other two pups, moving quickly but carefully. Each one felt like it was on the edge of death, but Jake could sense that tiny spark of life still flickering inside them. As he brought them into the warmth, the mother wolf settled down nearby, watching every move he made. Jake had never worked on anything alive before. He was a mechanic, not a doctor. But as he looked at the three tiny creatures and their desperate mother, he knew he had to try. Something incredible was about to happen in his small workshop, though he had no idea what it would be. Jake moved fast but steady as he worked to save the three small pups. The mother wolf watched from the corner of his workshop, her bright blue eyes following his every move. She had stopped making the soft whimpering sounds, but Jake could feel her worry filling the small space like a thick fog. He placed the first pup right next to his plasma forge, where the heat was warmest. The little creature's body was still stiff with cold, but Jake noticed something strange as he moved it closer to the light. Under the crystalline fur, he could see thin lines running along the pup's skin. They looked like tiny wires or tubes, glowing very faintly with a soft blue light. "What are you?" Jake whispered as he gently touched the pup's chest. The fur felt different from any animal he had ever petted. It was soft like normal fur, but each strand seemed to be made of something that was part hair and part crystal. When he moved his hand, the strands caught the light and sparkled. Like tiny diamonds, Jake grabbed a magnifying glass from his tool bench and looked closer at the pup's body. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. The thin lines under the fur were not blood vessels like he had expected. They were circuits. Tiny, delicate circuits that pulsed with weak electrical signals. These were not normal animals. They were something else entirely. Jake looked at the mother wolf with new eyes. She was still watching him, and now he could see the same faint lines under her fur. They were brighter than the ones on her babies, creating a network of soft light that ran all through her body. She was part machine, part living creature. "A cyborg. You're not just animals," Jake said softly. "You're something much more complex than that." The mother wolf tilted her head when she heard his voice. She made a sound that was almost like a response, a series of musical notes that rose and fell like a song. Jake's universal translator, a small device clipped to his collar, picked up the sounds and tried to process them. It only managed to translate a few words: help, cold, and dying. Jake turned his attention back to the pups. If they were part machine, then maybe he could fix them the same way he fixed other machines. He had always been good at understanding how things worked, even when they were broken or damaged. His hands seemed to know what to do before his mind figured it out. He carefully lifted the first pup and examined it more closely. The biomechanical circuits were damaged in several places. Some of the connections had been broken by the extreme cold, and others were simply not getting enough power. It was like looking at a computer that had been left out in a blizzard. Jake set up a work light and got his smallest tools. He had never worked on anything that was alive before, but the mechanical parts looked similar to the delicate electronics. He fixed every day. He just had to be extra careful not to hurt the living parts. As he worked, Jake began to understand how the pup's body functioned. The biological and mechanical systems were woven together so perfectly that it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. The circuits helped control the pup's heartbeat, breathing, and body temperature. When the circuits failed, the biological system started shutting down. Jake used a micro-welder to repair the broken connections. Each time he fixed a circuit, he saw the faint glow under the pup's fur get a little brighter. The mother wolf leaned forward, watching intently as her baby slowly came back to life. After 20 minutes of careful work, Jake heard something that made his heart jump. The pup took a small, shaky breath, then another. The tiny chest began to rise and fall in a steady rhythm. "That's it," Jake said, excitement creeping into his voice. "Come on, little one. You can do it." The pup's eyes fluttered open. They were the same brilliant blue as its mother's, but smaller and filled with confusion. It looked around the workshop, then at Jake's face. For a moment, they stared at each other. Then the pup made a tiny sound, like a squeak mixed with a musical note. The mother Whelps rose to her feet and came closer. She gently nuzzled her baby, making soft sounds of joy and relief. The pup tried to move its legs, but it was still too weak. Jake wrapped it in a warm blanket and set it in a safe spot near the heater. "One down, 2 to go," he said, reaching for the second pup. This one was in worse shape. Its circuits were more badly damaged, and some of the biological systems had started to fail. Jake worked for over an hour, replacing tiny components and rerouting damaged pathways. His hands were steady despite the pressure he felt. The mother Whelps's eyes never left him, and he could sense her growing trust in his abilities. When the second pup finally took its first breath, Jake felt a surge of pride unlike anything he had experienced before. Fixing machines was his job, but saving lives was something entirely different. Something that mattered in a way that went beyond paychecks and work orders. The third pup was the most challenging. It was the smallest of the three, and its systems were the most fragile. Jake had to use techniques he had never tried before, combining his knowledge of electronics with pure instinct. He found himself talking to the little creature as he worked, encouraging it to fight, to hold on just a little longer. "Your mama brought you to the right place," he whispered as he connected the last circuit. "She knew I would help. She knew humans don't give up on things that need fixing." When all three pups were breathing on their own, Jake sat back and looked at what he had accomplished. The mother Whelps came over to where he was sitting and did something that shocked him. She gently placed her large head against his shoulder, making a deep, rumbling sound that his translator picked up as grateful and friend. Jake reached up and carefully stroked her crystalline fur. It felt warm now, and the circuits under her skin pulsed with healthy light. As he petted her, he realized that something important had just happened. He had not just saved 3 lives. He had made contact with an intelligent alien species, and somehow he had become their friend. 3 days had passed since Jake saved the 3 pups, and his small workshop had become a very different place. The mother Whelps, who Jake had started calling Luna because of her silvery fur, had made herself at home in the corner near the heater. Her pups were getting stronger every hour, playing with each other and exploring their new surroundings. Jake watched them with amazement as they tumbled around his workshop. The pups were curious about everything, sniffing at his tools and trying to play with loose bolts and screws. Their crystalline fur sparkled in the light, and the biomechanical circuits under their skin pulsed with healthy blue light. They were completely different from any earth animals Jake had ever seen, but they acted like normal puppies in many ways. Luna had not tried to leave. She seemed content to stay with Jake, watching him work and keeping her baby safe. Sometimes she would make those musical sounds, and Jake's translator would pick up simple words like safe, warm, and thank you. He had started talking to her while he worked, and she seemed to understand more than his translator could handle. On the 4th morning, Jake was fixing a broken drill bit when he heard scratching at his door again. He looked at Luna, who had lifted her head and was listening intently. She made a soft sound, almost like she was calling to someone outside. Jake opened the door and found another creature like Luna standing in the snow. This one was smaller and had darker fur with silver markings. It carried something in its mouth, just like Luna had carried her pups, but this time it was not babies. It was a piece of technology that Jake had never seen before. The new creature, another female, placed the device at Jake's feet and stepped back. She looked at Luna, who made several musical sounds. The 2 creatures seemed to be having a conversation. Jake's translator caught fragments: human, repair, trust, and help. Jake picked up the device and examined it. It was about the size of a dinner plate, made of the same crystalline material as the creature's fur, but it was broken. Cracks ran through its surface, and the internal circuits were damaged in several places. It looked like some kind of advanced tool, but Jake could not figure out what it was supposed to do. Luna came over and nudged the device with her nose. She made a series of sounds, and Jake's translator managed to piece together, "Weapon, broken, need. You want me to fix this?" Jake asked, holding up the device. Both creatures nodded. A very human gesture that surprised Jake. He took the device to his workbench and began to study it more carefully. The technology was far more advanced than anything humans had created. But the basic principles were similar to the electronics he worked with every day. Jake spent the next several hours working on the device. It was challenging because the materials were unlike anything he had used before. The crystalline circuits seemed to be alive in some way, responding to his touch and changing their configuration as he worked. But his hands seemed to know what to do, just like they had when he fixed the pups. When he finally got the device working, it projected a holographic display that showed a map of the local area. Jake could see his workshop, the colony underground, and dozens of other locations, marked with strange symbols. Many of the symbols were clustered in the mountains to the north, in areas where humans had never explored. "There are more of you," Jake said, looking at Luna. "A lot more." Luna made a sound that his translator interpreted as yes. The other creature moved closer and touched the holographic display with her nose. The map zoomed in on one of the mountain locations, showing what looked like a hidden valley filled with crystalline structures. Over the following days, more creatures came to Jake's workshop. Some brought broken tools, others carried damaged weapons, and a few had injuries that needed his attention. Jake learned that they called themselves the Kyrithi, and they had been living in the frozen wilderness for many years, hiding from something they called the Hunters. Jake's workshop became a meeting place where the Kyrithi brought their problems and he provided solutions. His human technology was primitive compared to theirs, but it worked in ways that surprised them, where their own repair methods were complex and required special materials. Jake could often fix things with simple tools and creative thinking. The Kyrithi were fascinated by Jake's approach to fixing things. They would watch him work for hours, making soft musical sounds that his translator said meant interesting and clever. They seemed especially amazed by his ability to understand how their biomechanical systems worked, even though he had never seen anything like them before. Luna's pups grew stronger and more playful each day. They had adopted Jake as part of their family, following him around the workshop and trying to help with his work. Sometimes they would accidentally knock over his tools or get tangled in electrical cables, but Jake did not mind. Having them around made the long, cold days much more pleasant. One evening, as Jake was closing up his workshop, Luna approached him with something different in her mouth. It was not a broken tool or weapon. It was a small, glowing crystal that pulsed with soft light. She placed it carefully in Jake's hand and made a series of complex sounds. Jake's translator worked harder than usual, processing the long string of musical notes. Finally, it produced a translation: gift, trust, human friend, learn together, help each other, family. Jake looked at the crystal, then at Luna and her pups. He understood what she was trying to tell him. The Kyrithi were not just bringing him things to fix. They were offering him something much more valuable. They were offering him a place in their community, a chance to be part of something bigger than himself. "I understand," Jake said, carefully placing the crystal on his workbench, where it would be safe. "We help each other, that's what families do." Luna made a sound that needed no translation. It was pure contentment. Her pups gathered around Jake's feet, their crystalline fur sparkling in the light from the crystal. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside Jake's workshop, warmth and friendship had created something wonderful. 2 weeks had passed since Luna first brought her pups to Jake's workshop. The winter was getting worse instead of better, and Jake was starting to worry. The snow was now so deep that it reached the windows of his workshop, and the wind never seemed to stop blowing. The temperature readings on his instruments showed numbers that made no sense. It was colder than any winter in the colony's history. Jake was working on a heating unit that had been brought to him by one of the Carathi when Luna approached him. She had been acting strangely all morning, pacing around the workshop and making soft, worried sounds. Her pups stayed close to her. Sensing their mother's concern, Luna touched Jake's arm gently with her nose and made a series of complex musical sounds. His translator worked to process the long message, but it could only catch pieces. Danger. Cold. Machine. Ancient and help needed. What's wrong, Luna? Jake asked, setting down his tools. What kind of danger? Luna walked to the holographic display device that Jake had repaired weeks ago. She touched it with her nose and the map appeared again. But this time it showed something different. Deep underground, beneath the colony and the Carathi settlements, there was a massive structure pulsing with red light. Warning symbols flashed. Around it, Jake studied the display carefully. The structure was enormous, stretching for miles in all directions. It looked like some kind of complex machine with thousands of interconnected parts and energy conduits. But something was wrong with it. Large sections showed damage, and the energy patterns were chaotic and unstable. What is that thing? Jake asked. Luna made more sounds, and this time his translator managed to get more words. Old machine. Weather control. Broken. Freezing everything. Need human help. Jake felt his heart sink as he understood what Luna was trying to tell him. The endless winter was not natural. It was being caused by an ancient machine that was buried deep underground. The machine was supposed to control the planet's weather, but it was broken and stuck in a pattern that was making everything colder and colder. How long has it been broken? Jake asked. Luna's response was translated as, many seasons, getting worse, will kill all. Jake looked at the display again, studying the details of the massive underground structure. Even with his limited knowledge of such advanced technology, he could see that the machine was incredibly complex. It was the kind of project that would take teams of engineers years to understand, let alone repair. Why are you showing me this? Jake asked. I'm just one person. I fix small things, not planet-sized machines. Luna made a sound that his translator interpreted as testing. She touched the display again, and it showed images of Jake working on various Carathi devices over the past few weeks. The display highlighted his hands as he worked, showing how his human approach to repair was different from what the Carathi had tried. More images appeared, showing Carathi technicians working on parts of the ancient machine. They had been trying to fix it for years, but their methods were not working. The machine was too old, built by a civilization that existed long before the Carathi arrived on this planet. It required a different kind of thinking, a different approach to repair. You think I can fix it because I'm human? Jake asked, still not quite believing what he was seeing. Luna's response was clear. Human mind different. Cease solutions. Can touch old machines safely? Jake sat down heavily on his work stool. The responsibility was overwhelming. If he failed, everyone on the planet would die. The human colony, the Carathi refugees, all the life that had managed to survive on this frozen world would be lost. But as he looked at Luna and her pups, Jake realized something important. Luna had not brought her babies to him randomly. She had been testing him, seeing if he could be trusted with something precious. The pups were not just her children. They were the future of her species. By saving them, Jake had proven that he would not give up when lives were at stake. The pups, Jake said suddenly. You brought them to me as a test, didn't you? Luna made a sound that needed no translation. It was confirmation. Jake stood up and walked to the display. He studied the images of the ancient machine, looking for patterns and connections. The technology was far beyond anything he had ever seen, but the basic principles were the same as any complex system. Find the broken parts, understand how they were supposed to work, and figure out how to fix them. I'll need help, Jake said. I can't do this alone. Luna made more musical sounds, and the display changed again. It showed dozens of Carathi gathered in a large cavern, all looking at something. In the center, Jake realized they were looking at an entrance to the underground machine. The entire Carathi community was waiting for his decision. They're all counting on me, Jake said, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Luna came over and gently placed her head against Jake's side. Her pups gathered around his feet, making soft sounds of encouragement. Jake looked down at the small family that had changed his life, and he felt his fear begin to change into determination. "Okay," Jake said, reaching down to pat Luna's head. "I'll try. But I'm going to need time to study this thing, and I'm going to need all the help you can give me." Luna made a sound that his translator interpreted as together, family, trust. Jake looked at the display one more time, memorizing the layout of the ancient machine. He was about to attempt something that seemed impossible, but he was not doing it alone. He had Luna and her pups and an entire community of Karathi who believed in him. "Let's go save the world," Jake said, surprising himself with how confident he sounded. The incredible journey was about to begin. The journey to the planet's core began at dawn. Jake packed his most important tools into a special backpack that Karathi had made for him. The pack was lined with the same crystalline material as their fur, which kept his equipment warm and protected from the harsh conditions they would face underground. Luna and her 3 pups stayed close to Jake as they left his workshop. The pups were now strong enough to make the journey, and Luna refused to leave them behind. Jake understood why. If something went wrong, she wanted her family to be together. The group of Karathi who joined them was larger than Jake had expected. There were 12 adults, including Luna, and 6 young ones besides Luna's pups. Each adult carried special equipment or supplies needed for the mission. Jake was amazed by how organized they were, like a team of engineers preparing for a major project. The entrance to the underground passages was hidden in a cave system about 5 miles from Jake's workshop. The Karathi had been using these tunnels for years, creating a secret network that connected their settlements. Jake had never known that such an extensive system existed beneath the frozen surface. As they traveled deeper underground, Jake began to understand why the Karathi had been able to survive on this planet for so long. The tunnels were not just simple caves. They were lined with the same crystalline material that made up Karathi technology, creating a network of passages that stayed warm and provided light. The walls pulsed with soft blue energy, creating a path that was easy to follow. "This is incredible," Jake said as they walked through a particularly large tunnel. "You built all of this?" Luna made sounds that his translator interpreted as not built, found, improved. She touched the wall with her nose, and Jake could see that the crystalline lining was indeed ancient, far older than the Karathi presence on the planet. The same people who built the weather machine built these tunnels, Jake realized. "That's how you found the machine in the first place," Luna confirmed his guess with a sound that meant yes. They traveled for hours through the winding passages. Jake's legs began to ache, but he pushed forward. The temperature got warmer as they went deeper, and the crystalline walls became brighter and more complex. Soon, Jake could see patterns in the wall designs that looked like circuit diagrams or technical blueprints. Finally, they reached a massive cavern that took Jake's breath away. The space was enormous, with a ceiling so high that it disappeared into darkness, but it was not empty. In the center of the cavern stood the entrance to the ancient machine, and it was like nothing Jake had ever imagined. The entrance was a perfect circle, 50 feet across, carved into what looked like a single piece of black crystal. The surface was covered with symbols and patterns that seemed to move and shift as Jake watched them. Energy flowed through the patterns in waves of blue and silver light, creating a hypnotic display. Around the entrance, dozens of Karathi had gathered. They were all looking at Jake with expectant eyes. Some of them carried young ones on their backs, while others held tools and equipment. Jake realized that this was not just a repair mission. This was the most important moment in their history. An elderly Karathi approached Jake. This one was different from the others, with fur that was almost pure white and circuits that glowed with golden light instead of blue. Luna made respectful sounds when she saw the elder, and Jake understood that this was someone very important. The elder spoke in a series of complex musical tones. Jake's translator worked hard to process the message. Welcome, human friend. We have waited long for one who could help. The great machine sleeps badly and its dreams freeze our world. You are the one who can wake it properly. Jake looked at the entrance again, feeling nervous about what lay beyond. How do I get inside? The elder made more sounds. Machine will recognize you. Human mind is compatible. Touch the entrance. It will open. Jake walked slowly toward the black crystal entrance. As he got closer, he could feel energy in the air, making the hair on his arms stand up. The symbols on the surface began to glow brighter, as if responding to his presence. When Jake placed his hand on the crystal surface, everything changed. The symbols flowed toward his touch like liquid light, and the entrance began to open. It was not like a door swinging open, but more like the crystal itself was melting away, creating a passage that led into the heart of the machine. Beyond the entrance, Jake could see a corridor that stretched into the distance. The walls were lined with the same flowing patterns, but here they were much more complex and active. He could hear a deep humming sound like the heartbeat of some massive creature. I have to go in alone, don't I? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. The elder confirmed. Machine will only respond to one mind at a time. We will wait here for your return. Jake looked back at Luna and her pups. They had followed him faithfully all this way, but now he had to continue without them. Luna came over and gently touched his hand with her nose, making a sound that needed no translation. She was telling him that she believed in him. Jake picked up his pack and walked toward the entrance. As he stepped through the opening, he felt the temperature change. Inside the machine, it was warm and humid like a tropical forest. The air itself seemed to be alive, filled with tiny sparkles of energy. The corridor led him deeper into the machine, past chambers filled with crystalline structures that pulsed with light. Jake could see that some of these structures were damaged, their light flickering or completely dark. This was clearly the source of the problem. As he walked, Jake began to understand the scope of what he was attempting. The machine was not just big, it was vast beyond imagination, extending for miles in every direction. It was like walking through the nervous system of a sleeping giant, one that had been having nightmares for far too long. At the end of the corridor, Jake found what he was looking for. The central control chamber was a sphere-shaped room with walls covered in flowing patterns of light. In the center stood a pillar of pure crystal, about 10 feet tall, with thousands of connections running from it to every part of the machine. This was the heart of the weather control system. And it was clearly broken. Jake set down his pack and got to work. The incredible task had begun. Jake stood in the center of the control chamber, staring at the massive crystal pillar that controlled the planet's weather. The damage was worse than he had expected. Thousands of tiny cracks ran through the crystal, and many of the connection points were dark and lifeless. The whole system was running on maybe 10% of its original power. He walked around the pillar, studying the patterns of light that still flowed through it. Even damaged, the technology was beautiful. The crystal seemed to be alive, responding to his presence by brightening slightly wherever he looked. Jake had the strange feeling that the machine was trying to communicate with him. Jake opened his tool pack and began to work. The first thing he needed to do was understand how the crystal pillar connected to the rest of the machine. He traced the pathways with his hands, feeling for breaks and damaged sections. Each time he found a problem, he made a mental note of what needed to be repaired. After an hour of careful examination, Jake realized something that made his heart race. The machine was not just broken, it was dying. The crystal pillar was the brain of the entire system, and it had been running on emergency power for so long that it was slowly burning itself out. If he did not fix it soon, it would shut down completely, and the planet would freeze solid within days. Jake began to work faster. He used his micro-welder to repair the smallest cracks first, watching as each repair brought a little more light back to the crystal. The work was delicate and dangerous. One wrong move could cause the entire system to collapse. As Jake worked, something strange began to happen. The crystal seemed to be responding to his touch in ways that went beyond normal repair work. When he placed his hands on damaged sections, they began to heal themselves, as if the machine was learning from his movements and copying his techniques. "You're not just a machine," Jake whispered as he worked. "You're something alive." The crystal pulsed brighter in response to his words, and Jake felt a warm sensation flow through his hands. The machine was connecting with him, sharing its knowledge and understanding. Jake began to see images in his mind, the planet as it had been millions of years ago, green and warm and full of life. He saw the ancient civilization that had built the weather machine, trying to preserve their world as their sun began to cool, but something had gone wrong. A great war had destroyed the builders before they could finish their work. The machine had been left to run on its own, doing its best to maintain the planet's climate. For millions of years it had succeeded. But time and damage had finally caught up with it. Jake understood now why the Kyrathi had needed a human to fix the machine. The ancient builders had been similar to humans in the way they thought and solved problems. The machine recognized Jake as being like its creators, and it was willing to work with him in ways it could not work with the Kyrathi. The repair work became easier as Jake and the machine learned to cooperate. He would start to fix a problem, and the machine would help by rerouting power or adjusting its systems. They worked together like a team, human creativity combining with ancient wisdom, but the most difficult repair was still ahead. The central core of the crystal pillar was cracked almost completely through. If Jake tried to fix it the normal way, the whole thing might shatter. He needed to find a different approach. Jake thought about Luna and her pups, about how he had saved them, by understanding that they were both living creatures and machines. Maybe the same approach would work here? Instead of treating the crystal like broken equipment, he needed to treat it like an injured patient. Jake placed both hands on the cracked core and closed his eyes. He focused on the idea of healing rather than repairing, of helping the crystal remember how to be whole. The warm sensation flowed through his hands again, stronger this time. The machine was responding to his intent as much as his actions. Slowly, carefully, the crack in the core began to close. Light flowed back into the darkened sections, and the entire pillar began to pulse with healthy energy. Jake felt the machine's systems coming back online one by one, like watching someone wake up from a long, troubled sleep, but the process was changing Jake as well. The energy flowing between him and the machine was creating new connections in his own body. He could feel tiny circuits growing under his skin, similar to what he had seen in the Kyrathi. The machine was sharing its technology with him, making him part of itself. Jake was not afraid. The changes felt natural, like something that was always meant to happen. He was becoming a bridge between the human and alien worlds, carrying technology and understanding that could help both species. When the repair was finally complete, the entire chamber filled with brilliant light. Jake could feel the machine's joy and gratitude flowing through the connection they had created. The weather control system was not just working again. It was better than it had ever been, enhanced by the combination of ancient technology and human ingenuity. Jake made his way back through the corridors, feeling the machine's system stabilizing around him. By the time he reached the entrance, the Kyrathi were already celebrating. They could feel the changes in the air as the planet's climate began to return to normal. Luna and her pups rushed to greet Jake as he emerged from the machine. They could see the changes in him, the faint glow under his skin that marked him as someone touched by ancient technology. But to them, he was still the same human who had saved 3 frozen pups and earned a place in their family. In the months that followed, Jake became the bridge between the human colony and the Kyrathi community. His workshop became an embassy where both species shared knowledge and worked together. The enhanced abilities he had gained from the machine made him uniquely qualified to understand both human and Kyrathi technology. Luna's pups grew up to become the first generation of Kyrathi to live alongside humans. They learned human ways while teaching human children about Kyrathi culture. The friendship that had begun with a desperate mother asking for help had grown into something that would last for generations. Jake often thought about that first night when Luna had brought her frozen pups to his door. She had been testing him, but she had also been offering him something incredible, the the chance to be part of something bigger than himself. By choosing to help when help was needed most, Jake had not just saved 3 small lives. He had helped create a new future for 2 entire species. The incredible thing was not just that a human mechanic had fixed an ancient machine. The incredible thing was that compassion and trust had built a bridge between worlds, proving that some things truly were universal.